Listening to Unleash Your Genius can be good for your health.
Symptoms may include looking and feeling better,
More energy, healthier kids, and increased productivity.
Unleash Your Genius podcast brings you the science, art, and philosophy of health, wellness,
Epigenetics, and lifestyle. Stronger, fitter, faster.
naturally, holistically, simply.
Hey, what's up, Unleash Your Genius listeners? Our motto is the healthier you are, the more you're able to share your genius with the world. I have a special guest for you today. This is a really important discussion I have for anyone struggling with a child with autism. Terri Hirning is not only one of the nicest people I've spoken to, she's also one of the smartest I've ever met, and I'm so lucky to be interviewing her today. You are going to love this interview, especially if you are dealing with a child with autism or any child that really is a picky eater. You know, Terri doesn't just specialize in autism. She helps people from a broad spectrum of lifestyles just to get their eating and their lifestyle back. But she has a really interesting story about how she helped her son, who was extremely autistic and who was really thriving today. So you're going to love this interview. Terri's story is so inspiring, and her son's story is actually documented in the book Thinking Mom's Revolution. Terri's the co-founder of Real Food Mom, which is designed to provide the resources to help all of us eat healthy and live a healthy lifestyle through her information and through her coaching with her business partner. And so if you want a transcript of this episode so that you can go over it again and highlight some of the information that Terri shares, especially if you are dealing with a youngster with autism, if you're on your desktop, go to www.unleashyourgenius.com and sign up, and we'll get you that transcript right away. And if you're on your mobile phone and you're listening to this, just scroll down the show notes, and there'll be a clickable link at the bottom to www.unleashyourgenius.com. Give us your name and your email, and we will give you a full transcript of this episode. Hi, Terri. Welcome to the Unleash Your Genius podcast.
Thank you. It is a pleasure to be here with you.
Thank you. Look, I know I gave you an introduction, but can you tell us a little bit more about you?
Absolutely. I am a co-founder of a company called Real Food Mom. And what brought me to start this business with my business partner was actually my son's recovery from autism and the journey that led actually our whole family on in terms of our food supply and how it influences inflammation, autoimmunity, gut dysbiosis, and just overall health and wellness in lots of different areas, but especially related to autism in brain health. And so really, my son was diagnosed with autism at 4, almost 5 years of age, and had many of the classic symptoms of autism in terms of no speech development, no social interaction. He would not sleep. He screamed much of the day and night, would not respond when his name was called, or if people asked him to do anything or tried to engage him. There was very, very little interaction. And I was given a traditional diagnosis with not a lot of feedback or information or even direction as to what might help him in his development and his recovery, because at that point, he's 12 now, so this was a number of years ago, there wasn't a lot of information as much as there is now on autism recovery and what you could do. And I just started really immersing myself in a lot of the science that was emerging at the time. Certainly diet, there was already a lot of information out there about different diets for autism and why they may be helpful. And that was actually where we started and just really addressed a lot of the underlying issues with autism, including immune system dysregulation, gut dysbiosis, inflammation, undiagnosed food allergies. We did a lot of lab testing just to find out what was going on biomedically. and we just started treating. We went down our list of priorities, first this, then this, and just kept working at it. And so it was through that journey that I really got a glimpse of exactly how impactful our food supply and a diet is on brain development, ongoing brain health, our body as in general, and really helping control a lot of disorders that we see now today as being very common or chronic in even our children. And so really that's kind of what has led me to today and founding Real Food Mom.
So do you work specifically with parents with autism?
I don't. My clients really range the gamut from moms who want to feed their children better, but don't know what to do or how to really get more real foods into their child's diet. If we look at our food supply now versus even 10, 15 years ago, it's quite a different picture in terms of all of the marketing and the convenience foods. And there can be some real roadblocks, at least in people's minds, over how easy and how affordable and how delicious real healthy foods can be. Some of my clients just want me to come in and really educate them on some of the ingredients that are harmful or don't really support optimal brain functioning and wellness. The common things like MSG and food dyes and a lot of the chemical additives and why they're problematic and why we don't want them in our food supply. And I do have some clients that are within the autism community itself, but I see diet really as a larger piece that almost anybody, whether they're looking to get into a paleo diet and reduce grains, or whether they just want to know how to navigate their grocery store with ease and with their budget in mind and know that they're feeding their family really healthy, as close to nature, and foods that are really going to nourish and not do the opposite as we often see in today's chronic illness. Right.
I'm fascinated with the gut-brain axis, how the brain and the gut and the nervous system, the gut has such a complex nervous system that it's been compared to as similar as the brain, right? With all of the neurons and the communication that goes on in the enteric nervous system. And so for you, you've done a lot of the research behind that. Is that correct?
That's correct. And, I also work very part-time within the autism community for the Great Plains Laboratory and New Beginnings Nutritionals. And really being able to hear, from researchers like Dr. William Shaw, who started the Great Plains Laboratory, he explains it just so phenomenally well. And my son, for example, had a great deal of gut dysbiosis. So he had yeast overgrowth and he had Clostridia overgrowth. And these two pathogens really duke it out for control over the gut. And how does that impact the brain? Well, when we look at the metabolites of these two pathogens, let's take Clostridia, for example. Clostridia can excrete a metabolite that we measure on one of our organic acids tests called HPA. And it actually inhibits dopamine from being converted into norepinephrine. And so when we think about the gut, we traditionally think, it's really localized, right? And then we start understanding exactly how the health and wellness of our gut impacts our brain, impacts cognition, impacts focus, mental clarity. Yeast can do the same or similar things in terms of having metabolites that interfere with different neurochemical processes. And also, if we look at the role of leaky gut and some of the peptides that are involved with like wheat and dairy, for example, gluteomorphine and casomorphine, they fit on our opiate receptors in our brain. And so we can have individuals that act like they are high off of their food. And in the case of my son, when he was very young, before we had removed some of these things from his diet, he had poor pain sensitivity. He would come in with scrapes and cuts, and you wouldn't even know anything had happened. His senses were so dulled. He would rather drink milk than eat food. You know, those kinds of things that really clued me in much later in hindsight, right? It's always 2020. All of these behaviors that really led me to understand that he was truly addicted to these foods. And a great deal of our serotonin is produced in our gut. So that feel-good hormone, a lot of our diet and our gut really impact our brain in so many different ways. And just like you were saying, the communication, that's why the gut is called the second brain. There's so much that's tied there. And especially if you're talking about neurologically sensitive individuals like those with autism, it's even more important to understand this concept and really kind of focus on the gut first. At least that's what we did for my son. Gut has always been our foundation of healing, and I truly believe everything else really fell into place as we really targeted his gut healing.
So it's a holistic approach. You don't just treat the brain. So with the autism, I think there's a lot of misunderstanding that it's only a mental condition. And now a lot of the research is showing that it's not really that at all. Right? From what you're saying, it's more of a gut issue, a combination of the two.
Absolutely. It is absolute. Now, and so when we say certainly the gut has a large portion of impact, right? And we talk about the immune system being primarily in the gut. We talk about its impact on neurotransmitter functioning, and we talk about things like gut dysbiosis, which can certainly interfere with brain functioning, and then we go into other areas, because certainly as we talk about autism in as a broad spectrum, we also understand that everyone is an individual. What worked for my son may not work for another person's son or daughter. And really, what I see, as I've been in the autism community now, and in both a professional and a personal position, I've seen and talked to a lot of parents and a lot of children with autism, and some of the major components are gut dysbiosis and undiagnosed food allergies. Many times there's immune dysregulation, which one could theorize also links back to that gut impairment, right? Because a lot of our immune system is there. Right. Oftentimes there's methylation issues. And then, we're getting into a realm now where there's even greater understanding of epigenetic changes to the genome, right? And so we look at specific SNPs in our genes that are basically interacting with our environment, and that can be very broad as well, whether we're talking about GMOs and pesticides in our food supply, whether we're talking about maybe a medical procedure or anesthesia that the child had to be exposed to. Families like myself who noticed vaccine reactions in multiple vaccines given in the same day. There are lots of environmental issues that are really impacting which genes are expressed in our children, which genes are not expressed. And so toxicity is a huge issue. And in many of the kids that I've seen or had as clients or worked with their families in a number of different capacities, impaired detoxification was a large portion. And once you support detoxification, once you address diet, and that can be a source of toxicity as well, just looking at our standard American diet and food supply. But once you start addressing some of these things, including methylation, give the brain the needed supports. When we talk about gut dysbiosis, you could be feeding a child the most nutritious meal on the planet, but if it's not being absorbed effectively, then that's going to be an issue, certainly. So some supplementation oftentimes can be helpful for filling in those gaps, or the kiddos who need additional supplementation in certain areas, whether it's a specific amino acid or whether it's methylation support to help the brain and the body. So there's a lot of different things, but we can certainly look at it in a number of different ways, with that gut being what I see as almost that foundational piece, and then looking at immune system function and detoxification, and then potentially even, genetics, because we know certain people can't handle certain supplements or can't handle certain things, or are poor detoxifiers just based on their own personal genetics. And so that gives you these wonderful avenues to really do bio-individual treatment. And that's really what it comes down to, because you can look at an individual with autism and say, well, in the broad scope, we can do this, and we can do this, and we can do this. And certainly those will be helpful to a point, but each individual child or adult, for that matter, they all have their own unique things that are impacting them in those critical ways. And so really the broader picture is looking at them as individuals and just targeting what's going on. Just as if we went to the doctor for anything else, we would never write somebody off and say, oh gosh, you have chronic constipation. Well, that's just a part of arthritis. Sorry about that,
Right.
And unfortunately, in the autism community, that's what we see. We see, oh, it's a brain disorder. Oh gosh, that child won't sleep and they haven't had a bowel movement in 3 days. And well, that's just kind of a part of autism.
Right.
And I would say, no, it's really not, and there are lots of things that can be done. I mean, and the stories of recovery are coming out. And even if it's not, I know thousands of parents who are in the process of recovery, and it's just a matter of finding that piece for their child. And when I talk about diet, because that is, my passion, it started out as gluten-free, casein-free, soy-free. That wasn't what it took for my son. It took really being grain-free and pretty much 100% organic, and lots of different things. And so one of my biggest messages to families is, if you try something and it doesn't give you the desired response, try something different. Keep trying. Don't give up, because if we had stopped at just gluten-free, casein-free, my son wouldn't be where he is today, because it just took that extra couple of steps. And, it really is, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time, right? You also can't jump into something and expect yourself to be an expert at something overnight. This has been an 8-year process for me, and so we have to really be gentle with ourselves in this process, because for me, one of the biggest empowering things about my son's autism recovery was that I had some form of control over what happened with his health. Does that make sense?
Yeah. You mean by you had control by what you fed him and by his diet?
Absolutely. With what you said, autism is really considered a brain disorder, right? And so what does that do for parents? When you walk in and your child is assessed and there's something that's going on and you don't quite know what it is and you don't really know about autism, and then you have this doctor that hands you this diagnosis and then basically says, well, it's genetic, so there's nothing you can do. Find a good speech therapist, maybe find an occupational therapist. And, many of our families are told, find a good institution.
It's
that's
hopeless.
really where your child is going to end up. It is hopeless. And one of the biggest messages I want to spread is that it's absolutely hopeful. There is so much out there in the way of education for parents. And the great thing, this has taken years of me pretty much dedicating my life and now my career to what I'm doing. But one, you don't have to do it to that level. And two, you have the ability to change your child's trajectory.
Right.
You really, really do. You have to match up with some really great practitioners who are going to help guide you and support you, because certainly I didn't, go to medical school in the last 8 years, and there was a lot that I really learned from my child's physician, who led me on this journey right along with he took me on this journey. And you have to be willing to do that outside research, not take no for an answer, and really dive deeper into what it is for your child. Because at the bottom line is that as parents, we know our children best. And we are the ones that have the most impactful experiences with our child. Like you said, we're the ones feeding them 5-6 times a day, depending upon the age of your child. And, and we're the ones that put this food into them. We control their environment for the most part, obviously outside of school and things like that. We are the ones that understand their sleep cycle, how their body responds in sickness and in health, because those are really important clues, right? And oftentimes, especially if your child is nonverbal, you really do have to become a detective, because your child isn't going to be able to tell you verbally what's going on. And that adds a different component and a different element to really trying to nail down what's going on. But at the end of the day, you need to find a practitioner or a provider who supports you in this journey, because you have therapists, oftentimes you have speech therapy and occupational therapy, and maybe even a physical therapist that's in the mix. You're monitoring what's going on at their school level. You've got, doctor's appointments, and then of course the special diet thing. There's a lot of stuff going on, but I found it really empowering to know that as a parent, I have the ability to really impact my child's health and wellness. And as we did all of these things, well, then he started sleeping more than 2 to 3 hours a night. He stopped screaming as much. His language started to develop. Finally stopped wetting the bed.
When did you first start to see those changes? How long did it take when you first started with his diet and changing all these things?
Well, we started diet first, and we definitely saw different things in terms of attention and focus and responding to his name, more so. But really, a lot of the changes came when we started addressing his severe gut dysbiosis.
Okay, how did you do that?
That was a multi-pronged approach. We threw a lot of different things at these pathogens, because what happens is when they get a stronghold in there, they also teeter-totter. So as you treat one, let's say you're targeting yeast and you're making headway and it's going down, the Clostridia will oftentimes expand. They will multiply to fill that gap.
Right.
And so you would treat one, and then the other one would get worse, and then you would treat the other one, and the first one would get worse again. And so we did lots of natural antifungals, MCT oil, other forms of caprylic acid. We did black walnut and garlic and echinacea and golden seal. We tried a lot of things. We even did, we have always been working with a physician, guiding all of his treatments. And so we did even do prescription antifungals like nystatin and diflucan for a period of time. And as far as the Clostridia, his levels were so incredibly high that we did do antibiotics at a time, a couple of rounds of antibiotics. And then we did natural antibiotics, like biocidin, like other, like oil of oregano and things like that, both topically and internally. Some things aren't okay, for use internally. Biocidin is perfectly great for taking internally. We did a lot of that. And then really probiotics. And we did all sorts of different probiotics, the high potency versions. We did multi-strain. We did, it felt like we did it all. And then finally, I ended up doing some research on soil-based organism probiotics. And, basically the theory behind soil-based organism probiotics is in the olden days when we farmed and ate food that we grew on our own land, and there were fertilizer and, all of these wonderful microbes in our soil. And then we would pull that carrot up and maybe, wipe it off a little bit, but then we'd eat it. And all of those wonderful microbes would go into our gut and populate it for the betterment of our health. And as we've moved away from that normal cycle and had things like, glyphosate added into our food supply, which severely inhibits our microbiome, introduction of, antibiotics for different reasons, and that strips our microbiome. And so really it leaves the gut bacteria really open to some of these pathogens taking hold, like yeast and bacteria, which we certainly found. So adding in a soil-based organism probiotic and moving into a very strict, specific carbohydrate diet for that period of time was exactly what my son needed. And that really readjusted the microbiome. It starved out the bad bugs. The diet, with restricting all of the carbohydrates, which break down into sugars, which feed all of those, not so good bugs. And then adding in the probiotic to get in there and repopulate where necessary. That for my son was exactly what he needed.
You had him on a low carbohydrate diet initially? Or,
yes.
Yeah.
When we first transitioned, in the beginning, I was a very standard American diet person. And so when we first started even looking at gluten-free, I didn't even know what that really meant. And so we transitioned and we went from traditional wheat-based stuff into very commercialized gluten-free type stuff. So all the crackers and cookies and breads and all of those, things that I thought had to be a part of our diet. So as I grew in my knowledge and started doing some education for myself and started learning about the microbiome, certainly that's when we transitioned. Every step you go a little bit deeper. At least we did. And I started realizing, wow, great. It's gluten-free and dairy-free and soy-free. That's awesome. And that was what I needed for that period of time. But wow, all of these carbs, all of the rice-based stuff and all of the, all of the empty carbs are still breaking down into sugars. And it's still feeding all of this gut dysbiosis, which I'm trying to battle with all of these different natural products and even prescription products. I mean, his gut was really impaired. And that was when I started, reading some more of the science. We didn't do ketogenic with him. You mentioned the high fat, and that's very low carbohydrate. And so we didn't do that with my son, but I've done a ketogenic diet for my own self and have had a number of friends and clients who've done the ketogenic diet who've suffered from seizures, epilepsy, other mitochondrial issues, even cognitive impairment and things like Alzheimer's, dementia, and those kinds of things, to have seen wonderful benefits from a high-fat, very low-carb diet. With my family now, as a general rule, we just try and and really stick to a paleo way of life. That doesn't mean we never eat rice. I just don't have it as rice-based, bread and rice-based crackers, and we're going to have some rice flour pancakes. And, that was really where our diet was, because at the time, when you're moving from just a regular standard American diet and just looking at trying to take out gluten, for example, even that seems like, Mount Olympus,
Right.
when you're learning. And so for us, reducing those carbs and those starches. And so, rather than white potato, we do sweet potato. I'll make my own sweet potato French fries or just baked sweet potatoes. We'll do riced cauliflower rather than rice. On a regular basis. We stick to lean, grass-fed, organic grass-fed beef if we're going to eat beef, and organic chicken, and lots of nuts, lots of seeds, good healthy fats like avocado, lots of coconut oil in our diet, and lots and lots and lots of vegetables. I mean, every meal has vegetables, and then there's a little bit of fruit, and then some good protein sources, and the lower glycemic starches. So, I would never restrict carrots or, things like that.
Sure.
But we just really reduce rice and white potatoes and, lots of pasta and things like that. I'll use zucchini noodles rather than pasta for pasta, or the rice, flour noodles or whatever. So.
Right. Terri, I just want to talk about the struggle for a little bit, about the beginning with your young boy, 5 years old, and he has an addiction to, the white foods, the breads and the crackers and the milk. And I see a lot of parents going through the same thing, that, it's just too hard to get him away from that and to transition. Can you talk to some of the moms and dads out there that are going through that struggle? How did you get through that?
Absolutely. And I know exactly what you're talking about, because I hear this all the time as well. And really, one of the biggest things that I say is that I look at the behaviors I was facing, right, in my child. My child couldn't sleep. He screamed much of the day and night. He, couldn't even respond to me if I was 2 feet away from him, calling his name. And so when I look at this and say, wow, cooking all this food from scratch is really hard. Yes, but not as hard as dealing with the toddler who won't stop screaming or hitting or throwing or breaking or, the things that I saw from changing his diet, from, all of these interventions. I was sleeping at night. I mean, when we think about just in general, that was huge. That was huge for my family. That was huge for my own sanity. Let's be honest, right? Severe sleep deprivation. It wasn't good for him. It wasn't good for me. And so when I saw what I was able to accomplish in him by changing his diet and removing these things, was it hard? Yes. But guess what? There's always a substitute. There is always a substitute. And nowadays, there are so many resources, whether it's Facebook or Pinterest or just Google. If I put in, if I do a Google search, I'm working on a new recipe and I just kind of want to get an idea. You Google something and there's probably 20 different recipes, whether your child loves, and what I always, counsel my clients on is pick the biggest impact foods. So what are the foods your child just cannot live without? And let's figure out a substitute that's healthier. Let's just start there. And let's tackle one thing at a time. And yes, it's hard, but it's worth it when you see your nonverbal child starting to become verbal. When you have a child who's, screaming 4 hours of the day instead of 8, or, who is now responding when you call their name. Like, those are the things that it's like, okay, would you rather deal with the behaviors, or would you rather spend time in your kitchen cooking? And I really advocate batch cooking. when we're talking about efficiency and busy schedules, and I will pick a day and I'll do 3 different recipes, and I always double my batch. If I'm going to make pancakes one morning, it takes me almost no more time to double or triple that recipe, stick them in the freezer, and put them in the toaster oven that next morning or for the next week of mornings. How much time am I actually saving myself every morning for the next 2 weeks because I have these wonderful, home-cooked foods that are ready and waiting for me in my freezer? And so really, when we look at something and say, oh gosh, that's too hard, there are ways to make it easier and more manageable to where it's actually going to save you time, and the reflection in your child's behavior is going to pay you back in spades for that effort.
Right. Yeah, I mean, as soon as you get a glimpse of some kind of change in your son, that would have just been motivating enough to keep going. But I think a lot of parents don't have, they're already in a hopeless situation. That's why I think what you mentioned earlier about finding a practitioner that's going to support you will at least give you that initial sense of hope that you are in control, you have some control. But I see a lot of parents that just, they don't have that, but they do want to try. They've tried changing things, but, they're afraid of the kid just not eating at all, as opposed to, getting something in them at least. So yeah, I see a lot of frustration with parents around that initial charge to see if they can get some kind of change.
I agree. And, my son, like I said, he would prefer to drink milk, quite honestly. Milk and honey-made graham crackers were his 2 favorite things. And so I get it. And I also understand there's a sensory component potentially. My child had low muscle tone. He couldn't or wouldn't accept certain textures of foods. And so what I would tell parents is that a lot of times our body is driven by our microbiome, by the bugs that coexist with us, that really we're more bug than we are human. So when you have these things going on, that's going to drive your child's behavior. And certainly in my child, it drove his constant carb craving, right? Pizza, macaroni and cheese, graham crackers, milk, those are his favorites. And so when you start removing these things, there was a window of time where it was not pleasant in our home. And I am so glad I persevered, because once we got over that hurdle, his diet opened up unbelievably. This was a child that I had to basically puree his food together because he couldn't tolerate a texture beyond like the baby food 3rd stages, the kind of chunky baby food.
Right.
That was what he needed. And he couldn't eat, back in the day, he couldn't eat rice. It was too much. There were too many pieces in his mouth for him to tolerate. He would never, ever eat anything like a broccoli top, that's all crumbly and goes a million different directions. So there were a lot of different issues, like sensory issues and texture issues. And as we made these changes in his diet, things just opened up. And then he was eating different textures that he had never eaten before. He was willing to try new foods. And certainly in the autism community, there's a difference between a picky eater and a problem feeder. If I had a potential client come to me and say, my child is now down to 2 foods, and this is a child who will just stop eating, I would immediately refer them to a feeding therapist. The last thing you want to do is mess with a child's diet who is a true problem feeder and needs something really extreme, like a feeding tube, which I have seen in very, very small cases, but you don't want it to ever get to that point. So I'm always cautious and do a really thorough intake about the child's preferences, and then we start with the things that they like the most. And then let's go from there. Okay, so maybe your child loves hot dogs. Then I would really recommend going to an organic grass-fed beef hot dog. A lot of the fillers can include things like sodium caseinate, which is a form of dairy. There are lots of other really not good additives in regular hot dogs, but you can find some good options out there. So let's get the good options into them. Your child will only eat chicken nuggets. Applegate Farms makes a gluten-free, dairy-free, chicken nugget. Okay, transition, right? It's baby steps. We're not going to get to perfection. We just want progress.
Right.
And, and be creative. And really, there are so many national organizations nowadays that really, really help with that element of hope that you were talking about. So, the Thinking Moms Revolution is one such organization. And they've got 2 books that are out. My son's story is in the 2nd book. And so, they have a Facebook page and a website and a blog. And the 2nd book of the Thinking Moms Revolution is all about kids who are recovered or recovering. So I kind of think, there's no greater hope than listening to these stories of parents who have been there, done that.
Yeah.
Talk about curing autism, another wonderful organization. They have chapters all over the United States. They do a lot of wonderful mentoring. Taka has resources right on their website about going gluten-free, casein-free. National Autism Association, another really wonderful organization. So, reach out. Go to these websites. Go to the Facebook pages. There are so many parents like myself that really help mentor other parents. I blog. I know a lot of other people who blog in terms of, recipes and our experiences and protocols that are working. And really just start putting those pieces together and realize that, 1, there are lots of resources out there to be had, and 2, there's always someone out there who's willing to share their story. And like I said, every child and individual is unique, and we need to remember that in terms of protocols and things like that. But the underlying message of hope and recovery, that's not unique. That applies to every single child out there. And this even runs the gamut of ADHD and attention issues and a lot of these other issues that are all kind of the same mechanism that are impacted. It's just to what level, right? And so for parents, there's a lot more out there nowadays. And I understand, I get the overwhelming factor because it certainly can appear that way. But it's really one foot in front of the other, just one foot in front of the other, and noticing those changes that will come.
Terri, thank you. We haven't. I know we've gone pretty far off the script. Thank you. I've got so many questions, and we're almost out of time. But I just wanted to get your story from. I like to talk about struggle, and you mentioned that, you grew up, and as we all did, the standard American diet or the standard Australian diet, and then you made that change. You had to make that change for your son. I think that's when you started eating right and getting rid of the gluten and going paleo. Is that right?
That's correct. And, you're so right in that my son was what sparked it, right? My son was really the impetus. And then my daughter was born 2.5 years later. And she started, this was right on the cusp of us really delving into a gluten and casein-free diet. And my husband's side of the family has a history of some autoimmune issues, including eczema. And then my daughter was born, and she started showing signs of eczema. And as soon as that was right around the time we were removing gluten from our diets, as soon as we removed gluten, her eczema completely cleared up.
Right.
And, my husband struggled with eczema, severe eczema for his whole life. And, this steroid cream and that steroid cream and, all these Band-Aids. And then after all of the dietary changes, he no longer has issues with eczema. I've lost 60 pounds over the course of these years of this journey. And so it really has totally transformed the way I see food and nutrition, then the way I was raised and the way I began eating as an adult. So, I really look at that as, if I can change, anybody can change. Because Brian, when I tell you, like, I was about as processed as it came. Right. And when I look back, when I have people who say, oh my goodness, I don't even want to show you what's in my pantry, and I say, are you kidding me? That used to be me. Yeah. I totally understand. There's no judgment, right? We're all in this to learn. And I speak so highly about a paleo diet because of what it's really given my family. It really has, in terms of our health and wellness, and even looking younger. I look younger in my 40s than I did in my 20s.
Yeah.
And I really attribute that to my diet.
Yeah. Yeah. So I was talking to somebody the other day, and I'm 47, and he was in his mid 30s, and I was telling him that I played basketball on a Wednesday night, and he said, "What? How can you do?" He used to play basketball as well, but he thinks he's too old, and he's like, he's over 10 years younger than me. But anyway, I think you're absolutely right that cleaning the diet to what a human is supposed to eat, and exercising and moving the way people are supposed to eat just does wonders. I mean, as humans, we're typically we are manufactured for health. It's just the external environments that oftentimes disrupt what's already programmed in us.
Absolutely. And it's such a mindset, right? And like you said, eating right, moving your body, and really I would add a third piece to that is detoxification. I think, in our world today, actively working to support our detoxification, and exercise is certainly a component. A clean diet is certainly a component in that. There are lots of other ways you could support that, whether it's taking a glutathione supplement. I know, certain forms are certainly more effective than others, or taking a precursor like N-acetylcysteine, sauna, foot bath. There's lots of wonderful experiences that my family has had through Ion Cleanse foot bath, and just really helping your body eliminate that, right? Like you said, we are made so incredibly. And I think when you fuel your body and you move your body and you help support getting rid of the stuff that it's really not meant to take in terms of chemicals or pollution or whatever, I think the aging component, we changed the game there, really. Yeah. And we don't have to settle for the story that we often tell in our societies of aging, because I think people are really setting the bar higher and higher, and maintaining their physical fitness and their health and their wellness, and doing so in the way we were really meant to do, not pharmaceutically managed, so to speak, Yeah.
Well, unfortunately, Terri, I'm going to have to let you go soon. How can somebody get a hold of you?
Yes, they can go to www.realfoodmum, that's MUM.com. And there's a spot to contact my business partner and I on there. We have a Facebook page, which is just Real Food Mum. We all are also on Twitter and Instagram and Pinterest. So lots of wonderful ways. I do tutorials on our Facebook page and live videos on using great kitchen tools like the Instant Pot and ways to streamline your kitchen and your cooking. We share recipes and certainly provide support where needed. So they can find us a number of different ways.
I'll have links to all of your stuff on our website as well, so it'll be pretty easy to find you.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Brian. This has been an absolute pleasure.
Thanks so much for listening to Unleash Your Genius with your host, Dr. Brian Peterson. For more great content and to stay up to date, visit unleashyourgenius.com. We'll catch you next time.
See, I told you Terri was awesome. So if you want a written transcript, a PDF download of this conversation, go to www.unleashyourgenius.com, put your name and email, and we'll ship that out to you. If you're on your mobile, just scroll down on the bottom of the show notes. You can click that link. It'll take you automatically to our website, and you can enter your details there, and we'll get you that transcript right away. I hope you got a lot out of this, and we'll talk to you next time.